Good morning and welcome to the Daily Aus. It's Monday the 20th of April. I'm Elliot, Lawry.
I'm Billi, FitzSimons.
The landmark verdict against Nation and Ticketmaster is the latest in a case that could have implications for music fans around the world. On today's podcast, we're going to go through everything you need to know about the trial, including what the jury actually found, what happens next, and what it means for Australian concert-goers.
So, Elliot, I feel like that's how we start every podcast. I feel like this has been in the news cycle a lot. But with tickets, I do think that maybe since the pandemic, the conversation around how hard it is to get tickets has been everywhere. And it does feel like there have been a lot of lawsuits around this topic.
Yeah, well, you'd be correct.
Thank you.
I would say I used to go to concerts all the time. Like, it used to be something I'd do maybe weekly because it was like a fun, easy way to get out of the house. Nowadays, if I get to one once every 6 months, I'm happy to do so because it's not only really expensive, but it's actually hard to buy the tickets and you're up against all these other people who are competing for the same spot.
Do you remember when I got you tickets to Addison Rae?
I do. That was very kind. And I did not have to fight for those tickets.
You didn't. I just said, Elliot, here it is.
Yeah. Well, the reason it's super topical right now as well, we've obviously got Coachella, the world's biggest music festival, going on in the US.
I believe it just finished.
Yeah, it just finished yesterday. And we actually did a podcast on that last week. Emma and Lucy took us through a long history of Coachella and how it was actually founded over issues buying tickets through Ticketmaster, who we're going to talk about today because there's been a massive update in that case.
And so this case surrounds Live Nation, which owns Ticketmaster. What do we need to know about Live Nation?
So Live Nation is considered to be the world's largest live events company. In terms of what that means, they're in charge of producing live events, live music events, and also marketing touring acts. Think of it as the company that organizes and puts on the shows. In 2010, they merged with Ticketmaster, who is the world's biggest ticketing company. So Live Nation in terms of the production, Ticketmaster in terms of the ticketing. So they then came together under one roof. So all those things are now in one company, which is called Live Nation Entertainment together.
And so this case is about the fact that they were two massive companies individually, like you said, they merged, and that is the origin of why this case was brought against them?
Yeah, exactly. So Live Nation Entertainment, the company that's the two of them together, they currently control around 80% of ticketing at major US events.
Wow.
Massive, 80%. And that is every part of the concert experience, like we already said. So in 2024, the US Department of Justice, along with the attorneys general for 40 states, actually joined together to bring a lawsuit against them for running an illegal monopoly.
Can I quickly say that the fact that the plural of attorney general is attorneys general always confuses me.
I knew they'd trip you up.
But an attorney general is basically like the top legal officer in that specific jurisdiction.
Exactly.
So that means that these 40 states and their top legal officers took Live Nation to court over them running a monopoly. I feel like we should explain what a monopoly is.
I mean, it's not the board game. It is the board game. And that's actually a good example because when you think about it, when you're playing that game, the goal to win is to control as much of the board as possible. And that in itself is not necessarily illegal. There's plenty of big companies in plenty of industries that control the majority of that industry. But when it becomes illegal is when a company starts using that power to basically make it really expensive for consumers and also not improving the product. So in the case of something like the concert industry, it's making things more expensive to go to the concert and not making it better, and they've got no incentive to do so. And here in Australia, we've got something called antitrust laws. They're the same laws that are in the US that are part of this case, and that is basically to monitor companies, and when it starts to get to that point when they're abusing their power, the government will step in and use these laws.
I've never thought about the word monopoly being connected to the game Monopoly.
Yeah.
That blew my mind. And I think when I first started hearing about this is when Taylor Swift announced her concert, the Eras Tour. And initially when that came out and tickets went on sale, there was this huge debacle and she put out an announcement basically criticizing Ticketmaster, right? Am I remembering correctly?
I think you are. You are our Swiftie correspondent on the ground here at TDA, so I think you are the person for the task. It's not necessarily that it was a Taylor Swift only incident. That kind of thing was happening all the time with a lot of artists, but I think the scale of the demand for Taylor Swift tickets was so high in the US that when no one was able to buy tickets and, there was all these allegations that the tickets were going to bots and that the service fees were so high because Live Nation and Ticketmaster had said it that way, that actually triggered a government response. So the first thing they did was a Senate inquiry in the US into that particular incident with Taylor Swift. And that Senate inquiry then later down the line inspired this case, which was then brought.
Oh, so that was the origin of this court case.
Exactly, why we're talking about it today.
And so then what happened with this lawsuit? I mean, that was 4 years ago?
Yeah, so it did take some time. The case was lodged in 2024, but it only went to trial in March of this year. When it kicked off, it was only about a week in when the DOJ came out and settled with Live Nation Entertainment. They basically agreed that they would cap their fees, they'd pay a fine of around $280 million US, and crucially, the settlement said that they would not have to break up with Ticketmaster. So I think they were very happy to sign on to that.
So DOJ, Department of Justice in the US, they settled with Live Nation.
Yes, but the states did not, and they continued on with the trial.
So this is where I get confused with this story, that the Department of Justice, and that is always confusing in lawsuits where there are
multiple parties
and some parties settle, some don't. But here the Department of Justice, they did settle with Live Nation, but what we were talking about before with the attorneys general also suing Live Nation, they did not settle, which meant that the lawsuit then went ahead anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I think the easy way to think about it is that they're kind of two different groups. So the DOJ is representing the federal government, and they're there to kind of make sure that those antitrust laws are implemented and held to, whereas the attorneys generals are more acting on behalf of the residents of their states. So they're more looking out for the people on the ground, and they were saying that that settlement didn't protect the people that they were representing.
Hi, I'm Zara. I'm the co-founder of the Daily Aus, and we started this company because we think news can be done differently. If you agree, you can hit subscribe. It's the best way to help us grow. Now, back to the video.
So, Elliot, it's been a couple of years of this case going on, but we now have a verdict. What was that verdict?
The verdict was that the jury found that Ticketmaster and Live Nation were, in fact, running an illegal monopoly. Specifically, they found that Ticketmaster was dominating the ticketing market, Live Nation monopolizing the sort of venue market. And what they were doing was they were using that power to force people to use their venues and use their artist promotion services. So they were saying, if you want to play there, you have to come with us for the promotion part and the ticketing part as well. And they were forcing all these live acts to basically only be able to use them to tour.
How were they doing that?
Because they were leveraging having access to those venues.
So if they had exclusive access to those venues, for example, or had exclusive partnerships with those venues, that meant that they were being anti-competitive. It was anti-competitive behavior.
Exactly. That is kind of the definition of the illegal monopoly, because they were wielding that dominance in one area to then force people to use other areas.
So interesting. And what was Live Nation? I mean, there's now a verdict, so I guess their defense is less relevant. But what was their defense?
I mean, they denied the claims the whole way through, and their CEO even got up on the stand and blamed things like the Taylor Swift incident on a cyber attack. Like, they really deflected blame throughout the trial. But in terms of the response to the verdict, they've said that it's not the last word on this matter, and they are looking into a potential appeal route.
Oh, interesting. So what happens now that there has been this verdict that Live Nation and therefore Ticketmaster is running an illegal monopoly? Does that mean that they have to break up?
Well, that is up to the judge on the case. So the jury has to determine whether they are actually liable for the things that were being alleged against them. The jury has said yes, so the judge is now deciding whether the breakup is the right response.
Yes. Because you always get the verdict and then you get the sentence later. Got it. Okay, so we have to wait to see what the consequence of this for them is. Got it. Does any of this impact us in Australia? Because obviously we have Ticketmaster here in Australia.
Yeah, I mean, it's everywhere in the world, and we've seen cases all over the world against these two companies. This one is kind of the biggest one that we've ever seen. And in terms of how it affects us here in Australia, we don't have to directly follow anything that happens in the US. Our legal system doesn't work that way, but we do take a lot of inspiration from them because of how big of a country they are and how much power they hold. So our government would be looking at the US and then working with our regulators here on the ground to see how we could take a similar approach.
Of course, what happens in the US in terms of a legal case doesn't impact us here in Australia. But like you said, the government could draw inspiration from them.
And they did actually say, the consumer watchdog, the ACCC, said they were closely watching this case. So
also they have acknowledged it. Interesting. Okay, last question from me. Olivia Dean, whilst all of this has been going on, I always thought that Olivia Dean kind of brought this in some way, or she did something to do with Ticketmaster or tickets somewhere. Or did she start this? No, because you said Taylor Swift started this. How does Olivia Dean come into this? Also, if you don't know who I'm talking about, I'm sure you do. But she is a singer, a UK singer. She come be the man I need.
Oh, wow, yeah. It is always playing in our office. Yeah, she's an interesting one. Basically, there are a lot of artists who have piled on to sort of the criticism of Ticketmaster and Live Nation. Her specific example was around ticket resale. So what happened was she announced a North American tour, and when people were trying to buy secondhand tickets through Ticketmaster, the prices were astronomical. And that was because they weren't placing any limits on what people could charge for a secondhand ticket. And they were also, again, taking another round of fees on top of the fees they'd already taken the first time. And so she came out and said, this is ridiculous, cost of living crisis, you need to stop. And they did.
And that was Ticketmaster.
That was Ticketmaster, yeah.
But completely separate case.
Whole other kettle of fish.
Got it. Okay. Elliot, thank you for taking us through that.
Thanks, Billi.
Now it's time for the Tidbit.
Oh, my first Tidbit on the pod.
Your first Tidbit.
I don't know what it's going to be, by the way.
No, I decided to bring it today. And I've just gone rogue because there are no rules with the Tidbit. And I don't have something from the news cycle. I just have a fun fact that is one of my favorite fun facts that I think I bring up in too many social occasions. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Are you familiar with Flakes, the chocolate?
Yes. Delicious.
Great chocolate. One of the best, I would say. I really like melting chocolate.
Yum.
And so one time I decided that I was going to melt my little flake that I had.
Melt a flake?
And well, you look confused, and that's because you can't melt flakes. They are impossible to melt.
That is a fun fact.
Isn't that such a fun fact? And often it's so fun to bring up in social occasions because people say, that simply can't be true. I have to go find a flake. And then they do that and then they put it in the microwave and it never works because you can't physically melt a flake.
Well, that's what I'm going to go do now.
Yes. Well, I look forward to eating the flake after.
Wait, I have a question for you.
Yes.
What about twirls? Because isn't that just a chocolate-covered flake?
Well, I'm not familiar with the insides of the twirl. Okay, Orla, our producer, has done the research. Thank you, Orla. It was a quick Google, and you cannot melt a twirl.
Well, can we go get one anyways?
We can go get one anyway. A little excursion. Oh, sorry.
You can't melt a flake.
Oh. We can do all of the testing. We can just get all of the flakes.
Great.
That is all we have time for. Elliot, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Billi.
And thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Daily Aus. Like Mia said, if you can give us a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify, it really helps our podcast grow. We'll be back later today with the evening headlines, but until then, we hope you have a great day. You hate that? Do I need a new tidbit?